Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations, Terwilligen und ruhen, alle, Wälder, which translates to, now all the woods are sleeping. All in all, very straightforward chorale. Really not too much to write home about in this particular piece, so we're just going to hop right into the analysis. So we have two flats in the key signature. We start on B flat major and we end on B flat major, so I'm going to hedge my bets and say that we're in the key of B flat. We move to E flat major, E flat, G, and B flat, which is our fourth chord. And then we have D, E flat, A, and C. I think this D is an accented non-chord tone. This is actually A diminished over C, which is 7/6. And that takes us to our one chord, B flat major, B flat, F, B flat, and D. Tonic triad root position. A little passing tone in the melody there, and then we get D, F, B flat, and F, which is just taking our one chord and putting it in first inversion. No need to reiterate the Roman numeral on that one. And then we get ready for our imperfect authentic cadence here, where we have C, G, B flat, and E flat, which is C minor 7, in root position, which is 2/7. That takes us to F7, F, A, and E flat. Incomplete. There's no fifth in the chord, but it's a 5/7 chord nonetheless. And that takes us to B flat major, B flat, F, B flat, and D, tonic triad, root position. Next phrase, there's a bit of ambiguity. I think there's an argument to be made that it is either a half cadence or an imperfect authentic cadence. It's really a toss-up here. I think it's like, I'm mostly leaning towards the fact that it's a half cadence because that's what my ear tells me, because I think this A in the melody wants to resolve up to B flat, but I think it can also resolve down to F as well. So I think either analysis is valid. It just depends on how you hear it. And we get these ambiguous half cadence / imperfect authentic cadences with quite a bit of frequency in Bach, and it generally involves the key of the dominant. Kind of the same way that subdominant cadences have that effect where it's difficult to know whether we've modulated or whether we haven't modulated. I think it's just going to depend on how you hear it, and I don't hear that we've modulated even though we have the dominant preceding the final cadence, the secondary dominant that is. So we're going to stay in the key of B flat, but you could analyze this in the key of F if you wanted as well. We start off with B flat major, B flat, F, and D. No need to reanalyze. Passing tones in the melody and the tenor here before we have another B flat major chord. B flat, D, B flat, and F. No need to reanalyze again. Passing tones in the lower voices, and then we get D, F, B flat, and F. Just taking our tonic triad and putting it in first inversion. No need to reiterate the Roman numeral. Passing tone in the bass before we get F, B flat, and C. A little 4/3 suspension here over the bass. It's typical to see 4/3 suspensions over the bass, or just 4/3 suspensions in general in the context of a root position dominant triad. And then we get B flat major over D, F, A, and D. Apologies, we do not get B flat major over D, we get D minor. Sorry, I had that incorrectly analyzed in my notes. That's D minor in root position, and we get some passing tones going on in the melody and the tenor again. C and E flat with that D do not give us an analyzable chord, so a bit of a deceptive progression, kind of a substitute for B flat major here. Afterwards we get G minor, G, D, G, and B flat. So this kind of makes sense because 3 typically wants to go to 6. If you are thinking about harmony in terms of the cycle of falling fifths, which is a narrative structure that composers like Bach used to traverse the major scale or the minor scale for that matter. And then we have a passing 7th in the bass, and then we have E natural, C, G, and B flat, which is C7 over E, which would be 5/6/5 of 5. C is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it. And then we have F major, F, C, F, and A, which is our 5 chord. I don't really have enough room in the margin here to analyze this in the key of F major, but this would be a 2-5-6-5-1 progression in the key of F major if you wanted to analyze it as such. But afterwards we're following this phrase with a shorter, just real estate-wise phrase, and it does end with a half cadence. There's less ambiguity. We start off with 5 again, F, A, C, and F, which is our, it's our 5 chord. We don't need to reanalyze. Passing 7th in the bass, and then we get B flat major again. D, B flat, F, and B flat, which is our tonic triad in first inversion this time. D is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it. We then have C, E flat, G, and C. You could analyze this as a 2 chord. I think that's valid. I think this A is most likely the root of the chord, though. This is a 7-6 chord, and it's very common for us to see this pattern of 1-6 going to 7-6, and then on the other side of the chord, we see 1 usually. B flat, F, B flat, and D. This pattern here, or the retrograde of this pattern, 1-7-6-1, super common in Bach's chorale writing. We see this pattern sort of as the foundation for a lot of the progressions in Bach. If it's not this exact pattern, we see the pattern of 2 like Roman numerals that are separated by an inversion, and the chord that bridges the gap is a diatonic step below in first inversion, or a diatonic step above in root position. That's what I'm coming to realize now, is that sometimes we would see 7-6, sometimes we would see something like 2, but in the case of the 1 chord, a lot of the times we see this passing tone here, which I think actually imposes the root of the chord as the note off of the harmonic rhythm, but I think 2 makes sense as a valid analysis. Sometimes we see things like 4-6-5-1, for example, instead of like 4-6-3-6-4. Anywho, D is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it. E flat is a non-chord tone, so we'll mark it. And F is a chord tone, so we won't mark it. That takes us to E flat, B flat, B flat, and E flat. Kind of an interesting chord here. That's just like a big open fifth if that is incorrectly printed. Unless I'm reading that wrong. Let me go ahead and double check with the... Yes, this is supposed to be a G, which makes a lot more sense. Sometimes it makes me wonder that I need to proofread these a little bit better. So that's supposed to be a G there. That makes a little bit more sense, but still, regardless, it's a 4 chord. D is a passing 7th before we cadence on F major. F, A, F, and C, which is our 5 chord root position. Alright, next phrase ends in the key of G minor. We have a bit of an interesting phrase here where I think we get this, B natural sort of functioning as the Picardy third in this cadence here, which is kind of interesting. And I think there's some arguments to be made that pretty much the entire phrase is in the key of G minor, but I don't really think the modulation happens until close to the cadence, even though we start with the dominant. So I think the dominant sort of functioning as a foreshadowing device that's going to show us where we're going, but we never quite get that resolution to the minor key in its entirety, because 6 just ends up turning into sort of a turnaround of sorts that loops us back into B flat, which then spindles into the key of G minor, which is kind of interesting, but we end on G major, so we never quite get that complete resolution where G minor is the our point of arrival at the end of the phrase. But regardless, we start with D major over F sharp, D, A, and D, which is 5-6 of 6 in this case. Like I said, I don't think we've modulated just yet. We have G minor afterwards, G, D, A, and B flat. It's very common for tonic functioning chords to have this 9/8 suspension over the bass. I guess there's an argument to be made here that by the time the resolution happens, we get G in there as well, which would mean this could also be 4-6, and this could be a potential secondary deceptive progression, but I'm just going to analyze it as 6. Bach is just playing little contrapuntal tricks on us here, but it is very common for us to see like 5 of 6 going to 4. That's just a roundabout way of saying 5 going to 6 in G minor terms, and it's a secondary deceptive progression. But afterwards we get A, E flat, G, and C, which is A minor 7 flat 5 in root position. Or if you look at these Fs as the roots of the chords, Bach does do this with some frequency. You could look at this as also 5-6. I think they're both functioning the same way. They both largely have the same pitch content, so they are interchangeable in terms of their function and their placement in this chorale. And the fact that they're close to one another and there's room to make an argument for which one is to be analyzed here, I think that's saying something in terms of how close they are, because Bach often morphs chords by changing one of the tones, and that has an impact on the analysis as well. But that's going to take us to B flat, which is the main reason why I don't think we've modulated yet, because we have a fairly straightforward like 4-7-1 or 6-5-1 progression, some type of predominant dominant tonic progression in B flat, and that just doesn't scream G minor to me. I think that happens later. But yeah, we have B flat, D, F, and D, tonic triad. G's a little passing tone here in the alto before we get B natural, D, A flat, and F, a little chromatic bass line here, which is B diminished, which could be 7-7 in the, of 2 in the key of B flat major, because B is the leading tone to C, and C is our supertonic, or our 2 in the key of G minor, or sorry, in the key of B flat major. I'm getting ahead of myself here. But you could also analyze this as 5-6-5 of 2 as well. We see this a lot depending on whether you think this G, kind of the same way that these Fs are functioning, if this G is the root of the chord to you, it would change the analysis. But they're basically the same chord, both in function and pitch content. They're literally just a half step apart. Regardless, that takes us to C minor, C, G, I forgot how to read for a second. G and E flat reading is sometimes very challenging for me. After our 2 chord, I think this is the point where we modulate to the key of G minor, coincidentally after we tonicize 1 chord. You know, actually this phrase is kind of quirky in that regard, because we end on G major and we pivot to G minor by tonicizing C minor, which is kind of interesting because G major would kind of imply a half cadence in the key of C minor, but I don't think this really sounds like a cadence in the key of C minor. This really sounds like a 4-7-1 progression in the key of G. Yeah, it's really interesting actually. So after C minor we get F sharp diminished over C, or F sharp minor 7 flat 5 actually. We have C again, A, F sharp, and E flat, which is 7-4-3. Kind of an interesting cadential progression here, 4 in root position going to 7-4-3. It kind of evokes a similar progression to what we saw in the first 2 phrases, where we have this one held tone here in the melody. And here it's both the 3rd of C minor 7 and the 7th of F7. Here, this held B flat is the 3rd of G minor and the 7th of C7. And here we have it as the 3rd of C minor, and here it is the 7th of F sharp 7, which is interesting. Or F sharp minor 7 flat 5. And that takes us to G minor, which I think is our tonic, but who knows, maybe this is a half cadence in the key of C minor. I just think it's kind of a quirky phrase to have, I guess, sort of like maybe the opposite reasoning here. Maybe I will put half cadence there, and I'm erring more on the side of this being an imperfect authentic cadence. That's a really interesting phrase, kind of like a sleeper phrase there. Anywho, afterwards, I think we have a mid-phrase modulation here, where despite the fact we end the phrase in the key of F major, I do think we go there through B flat major again. So we end in an imperfect authentic cadence. We start with G minor. In one of the first videos I ever made, someone commented and said, be careful, this B natural is not carried over into the alto. This is a B flat, which is something that I didn't observe, and it ultimately didn't have a tremendous impact on the analysis, but it was a really good point because the modulation came later into the phrase. But here we have G minor, which I think is just 1 in the key of G minor, and also 6 in the key of B flat, G, G, B flat, and D, with a passing tone in the melody. And that takes us to F major, A, F, C, and F. It's in first inversion. F is a chord tone, A is a chord tone, E flat's a passing seventh, so we'll mark that. And that takes us to B flat major, B flat, D, B flat, and F. So this, again, predominant, dominant tonic progression makes me feel like we're not quite in the key of F yet, namely because this E flat here. If this E flat were an E natural, I think no question we'd be in the key of F major, but the fact that E natural comes in later in the phrase is an important distinction, I think. But afterwards we have B flat, E natural, G, and C, which is 5-4-2. Sorry, also this F, this B flat in the key of F is also our 4 chord in the key of F, which makes more sense. This B flat chord in the key of B flat is our 4 chord in the key of F. That's what I was meaning to say. 5-4-2, we would expect that to resolve to 1-6, which it does. We have A, we have F, we have F, and we have C. 4-2 chords typically resolve down by step in the bass, so 5-4-2, we would expect that B flat to go down to A, and we would expect the roots to be a fifth apart down, so 5 would go to 1, 6 would go to 2. That cycle of falling fifths relationship is very much preserved in the context of a 4-2 chord resolving to the next chord. But afterwards we see 1-6 go to G, F, A, and D. I think this G is an accented non-chord tone. This is actually D minor over F, which would be 6-6. And then we go to a very beautiful progression. This melody has this suspension here in the melody where they have a 2-3 suspension between the melody and the alto, where this A and this B flat, this half step, is really just crunchy, and when it splits into a minor third here, it's just something very typical of this melody that reminds me of this particular musical, the musical content, not the text, because the melody isn't nun ruhen alle Wälder, or Wälder, sorry. It is O Welt, ich muss dich lassen, which also has its own text, but this is just the melody set to this particular text, or this text set to this melody. Sorry, I mixed that up. But afterwards we get G, F, A, and B flat. This A, again, is functioning like a suspension, but still G minor 7 is functioning like 2. 6 going to 2 is a very normative progression, something that we see often in the context of preparing for a cadence. And then we see C, E natural, G, and B flat, so 5-7. Very similar cadence to the first one that we had here at the beginning of the chorale, this time in the key of F. F, C, F, and A. So our tonic and root position. And then afterwards we're ending the phrase with a perfect authentic cadence in the key of B flat. And then yeah, it's a fairly straightforward phrase to take things out. We start with F major again, F, A, C, and F, with this passing seventh on the bass. It's 1 in the key of F, and also 5 in the key of B flat. That takes us to B flat, D, B flat, F, and B flat, which is 1-6. We then have C, B flat, E, and C. You could make an argument this is 2-7, like an incomplete C minor 7 chord, but I do think this B flat is a 7-6 suspension over the bass, which would make this A diminished over C. Again, very similar progression to what we see often in Bach with this 1-6-7-6-1 progression, B flat, F, and D, tonic triad root position. Then we see C minor 7 in first inversion, E flat, B flat, G, and C. We know that Bach loves 2-6-5 chords, especially in cadential contexts. This is kind of close to the cadence. It's not exactly functioning as their predominant chord. It's sort of like an accessory to 5, but we do get an intermediary chord here. D is a little passing tone. E flat is a chord tone, so we won't mark it. And then we have F, B flat, F, and D. B flat major over F, that's 1-6-4. We would expect that to go to 5. F, A, F, and C. Is that E flat? Yeah, that looked like an E flat to me. E flat is our chordal 7th, so we'll mark it as a non-chord tone here. It is sort of part of the chordal idea, but it's not a chord tone in this context, so I'll mark it. Also put a bracket underneath this 1, 6, 4 going to 5. And then of course we end on B flat, D, F, and B flat, tonic triad, root position. And that is today's analysis. I guess really the only two takeaways are this little chromatic bass line here, and also we have a mid-phrase modulation here at the in the penultimate phrase from B flat to F. So we start the phrase in B flat and then we move to F. And it's interesting when Bach, usually if we see a modulation like here for instance, if we start a phrase, well actually no, is there a good example? The last phrase is probably the best example. We modulate to B flat at the very beginning of the phrase and then we move to the end of the phrase without leaving the key of B flat. This is the most common modulation, I guess, scheme that we'll see in Bach. We'll see one modulation and it'll see all the way to the end of the phrase with that one modulation, but sometimes we see multiple keys in the phrase. That's all I mean by mid-phrase modulation. But that's all I really want to talk about in this chorale, so I will cap the video off on that thought. If you're interested in following me along on the journey to analyze all of Bach's chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. You can hit the notification icon and like the video if you enjoyed the content. Thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.